My hands trembled as I held the forged power of attorney document, the ink still fresh from the printer, in my own son's home office. At 71 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing in Michael's study at midnight, flashlight in hand, discovering that my firstborn had been systematically stealing from me for the past 18 months. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and 6 weeks ago I buried my husband of 47 years. Richard left me what I thought was a comfortable inheritance, our paid-off house in Westchester County, worth $1.8 million, his life insurance policy of $650,000, and his retirement accounts, totaling $2.3 million. What I didn't know was that my son Michael had been forging my signature on financial documents since the day after Richard's funeral. The document in my hands authorized him to withdraw $400,000 from Richard's IRA account. Below it, I found bank statements showing 17 separate transfers over the past month alone, each one bearing my forged signature. The amounts ranged from $15,000 to $85,000, all going directly into Michael's personal checking account. But what Michael didn't know was that I had been watching him. What he didn't know was that his confused, grieving mother, who supposedly couldn't manage her own finances, was actually a retired forensic accountant who had spent 35 years tracking down financial fraud for the FBI. If you're watching this story, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because what I discovered next and what I did about it will show you exactly what happens when someone underestimates a woman who knows how to follow the money. The real shock came when I found the second folder. Hidden behind a false back in Michael's filing cabinet were documents showing he owed $340,000 to 3 different casinos in Atlantic City. Credit card statements revealed he'd been using my forged signatures to take cash advances, buying chips with money that should have been securing my future. Bank records showed he'd taken out a second mortgage on his own house, using it as collateral for even more gambling debts. But the cruelest discovery was the email chain between Michael and his wife, Patricia. In messages dating back to just 2 weeks after Richard's funeral, Patricia had written, "Your mother won't live forever. We just need to get as much as we can before she goes into a nursing home and Medicaid takes everything." Michael's response was even colder. "She barely knows what day it is anymore. The doctor said her memory issues will only get worse. We're not stealing. We're preserving the family assets." Memory issues. I had been to one appointment with a geriatrician about some mild forgetfulness after Richard died, and Michael had turned that into a narrative of dementia to justify his theft. Standing there in his office, reading about my supposed cognitive decline in black and white, I felt a rage I hadn't experienced since my FBI days when I'd uncovered a $50 million embezzlement scheme. The worst part was realizing how long this had been planned. I found a notebook in Michael's handwriting, dated just 3 days after Richard's death, with calculations showing exactly how much he could steal before I would notice. He had estimated my assets at $4.2 million and projected he could take nearly half before triggering any serious investigation. What Michael had failed to account for was that his supposedly confused mother had installed security cameras in her own home 2 months ago. What he didn't know was that every time he'd visited to help with my finances, I'd been recording everything. I closed the filing cabinet and turned off my flashlight, walking through Michael's dark house, past photos of family vacations and holiday gatherings where he'd smiled and hugged me and called me the best mom in the world. I felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just theft. This was a calculated betrayal that had started before Richard was even buried. As I drove home through the empty streets at 1:30 a.m., I thought about the conversation I'd had with my younger son David just that afternoon. He'd called to check on me, worried because Michael had told him I was having real problems with my memory and that he was taking care of Mom's finances now. David had said, "Mom, are you sure you're okay? Michael says you forgot to pay your electric bill 3 times last month." I hadn't forgotten anything. Michael had been intercepting my mail, opening my bills, and paying them from accounts he now controlled with forged power of attorney documents. He was creating a paper trail to support his story of my declining mental capacity while simultaneously robbing me blind. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made my decision. Michael thought he was dealing with a confused widow who would be easy prey. Tomorrow, he was going to discover that he had picked the wrong target. Tomorrow, I was going to remind him exactly who his mother used to be before she retired. But first, I had some phone calls to make. At 6 a.m. the next morning, I made my first call to James Morrison, my former partner at the FBI, who now ran a private investigation firm in Manhattan. James had worked alongside me for 15 years, tracking financial crimes that had put dozens of white-collar criminals behind bars. "Eleanor Christ, it's been, 8 years since Richard's retirement party?" James sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me. Then his tone shifted when I explained why I was calling. "Your own son, Jesus. How much are we talking about?" I spread the documents across my kitchen table. "Conservative estimate, he's taken $847,000 so far. But James, there's something else. I found gambling debts, second mortgages, and a pattern of forgery that goes back to the day after Richard's funeral." The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. James was calculating just like I was. This wasn't just theft between family members. This was organized financial fraud that crossed federal lines the moment Michael had forged documents to access Richard's federal employee retirement accounts. "I can have someone up there by tomorrow," James said. "But Eleanor, you need to understand what this means. If we pursue this criminally, Michael could face 5 to 10 years in federal prison." I looked at the framed photo of Michael's college graduation on my mantelpiece, remembering how proud Richard and I had been when he passed the bar exam. "James, my son has been stealing my dead husband's money to feed a gambling addiction. He's forged my signature over 30 times and told his brother I have dementia to cover his tracks. What exactly am I supposed to feel sorry about?" 2 hours later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Michael standing there with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery, the same routine he'd established over the past month during his weekly visits to check on Mom. "Morning, Mom. How are you feeling today?" His voice had that patronizing tone I'd grown to recognize, the one that suggested I might not remember our last conversation. I invited him in, watching as he moved through my kitchen with the familiarity of someone who'd been rifling through my personal papers for months. He pulled out a manila folder and spread several documents on my table. "Mom, we need to go over some bills today. You missed a few payments again, and I had to cover them from your checking account." The documents were masterfully forged. Electric bill, gas, bill, property taxes, all with my signature, all showing late payment penalties that didn't actually exist. Michael had created an entire false paper trail to justify his access to my accounts. I played along, adopting the confused tone I'd apparently been perfecting without realizing it. "Oh dear, I don't remember these being late. Are you sure?" Michael's expression shifted to what I can only describe as predatory patience. "Mom, This is exactly what we talked about last week. The doctor said these memory lapses might get worse. That's why you signed the papers, letting me handle your finances. Remember? He pulled out the forged power of attorney document I'd found the night before, pointing to my signature with a concerned expression that would have won him an Oscar. The signature was flawless. Michael had clearly been practicing my handwriting for months. But what he didn't know was that I had developed a habit dating back to my FBI days of embedding tiny identifying marks in my signature. A microscopic extra loop in the E, a barely visible extension of the final L in Hartwell. Marks that would be invisible to the casual observer, but unmistakable to a forensic handwriting expert. The signature on Michael's document had none of these marks. Of course I remember. I lied smoothly. You're such a good son to help me with all this. I don't know what I'd do without you. Michael's smile was warm and reassuring, the smile of a loving son, caring for his aging mother. But I saw something else in his eyes now. A flicker of contempt, as if my gratitude was just another confirmation of how easy this had all been. He pulled out his phone and showed me what appeared to be a banking app. See, Mom, I've been moving your money into higher yield accounts, just like we discussed. You're earning much better interest now. The account showed a balance of $1.2 million, which seemed reasonable given my known assets. What Michael didn't realize was that I had memorized every one of my real account numbers during my FBI career, and the numbers on his phone screen didn't match any account I had ever opened. He was showing me a completely fabricated banking interface, probably created with one of those website-building apps designed to keep me from asking questions about where my money had actually gone. As Michael packed up his forged documents and prepared to leave, he kissed my forehead and squeezed my shoulder. Mom, I want you to know how much it means to me that you trust me with this responsibility. Dad would be so proud of how well we're managing everything together. The mention of Richard hit me like a physical blow, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. Michael was using my grief, my love for my deceased husband, as another tool in his manipulation. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen and called David. My younger son answered on the second ring, sounding harried. Mom, hi. I'm actually in court in 20 minutes. But Michael said you called him confused about some bills. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Has Michael ever asked you for money? Specifically, has he mentioned any gambling debts? The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, David's voice came back much quieter. Mom, what's going on? How did you know about the gambling? My heart sank. Tell me everything. David's story unfolded like a nightmare. I should have seen coming. 6 months ago, Michael had approached him claiming he needed $50,000 to cover some temporary cash flow issues with his law practice. Then it was another $30,000 for equipment upgrades. Then $75,000 for what he claimed was a sure-thing investment opportunity. David, successful, but not wealthy as a high school principal, had borrowed against his own retirement account to help his older brother. He'd given Michael a total of $155,000 over the past 6 months, money he now realized he might never see again. Mom, he swore to me that he was getting a big settlement from a personal injury case. He showed me documents, contracts, with a law firm in Philadelphia. He said he just needed to bridge the gap until the money came through. I closed my eyes. The law firm documents had probably been as fake as the banking app Michael had shown me that morning. My son wasn't just stealing from me. He was systematically defrauding every member of our family, using our love and trust as weapons against us. But what Michael didn't know was that every conversation was being recorded by the security system I'd had installed in my house. What he didn't know was that James Morrison was already on his way to Westchester with a team of forensic accountants and federal investigators. And what he really didn't know was that at 71 years old, I wasn't about to let anyone destroy the financial security that Richard and I had spent a lifetime building. Not even my own son. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 8 years. I put on my best business suit, the navy blue one I used to wear to court when testifying as an expert witness in financial crime cases. I drove to the main branch of First National Bank in White Plains, where I'd done business for 23 years. Martha Rodriguez, the branch manager, greeted me with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Hartwell, I have to say, we've been worried about some of the unusual activity on your accounts lately." I sat across from Martha's desk and pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. "Martha, I need you to print out every transaction on every account associated with my name for the past 18 months. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every check that's been cashed." Martha's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Hartwell, your son Michael has been handling most of your banking for the past several months. He has power of attorney and specifically asked us not to send you statements because they were confusing you." The words hit me like ice water. Michael had not only been forging my signature, he'd been actively working with my bank to hide his theft. He'd convinced them that I was mentally incompetent and that sending me my own bank statements would be harmful to my psychological well-being. "Martha, I need you to understand something very clearly. I am 71 years old, not 91. I have never signed a power of attorney authorizing Michael to access my accounts, and I have never requested that my bank statements be withheld from me." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my retired FBI credentials. Martha's eyes widened as she read my identification card. "I spent 35 years investigating financial fraud for the federal government. What my son has been doing to me is called elder financial abuse, and it's a federal crime. Now, are you going to help me document this theft? Or am I going to have to explain to a federal prosecutor why this bank facilitated the systematic robbery of a retired federal agent?" The change in Martha's demeanor was immediate. Within an hour, I had a complete picture of Michael's theft printed on 17 pages of bank records that painted a devastating portrait of systematic fraud. Michael had been forging my signature on withdrawal slips, moving money between accounts I didn't know existed, and even taking out a line of credit against my house. He'd stolen $1.1 million in total, not the $847,000 I'd initially calculated. He'd been so confident in his scheme that he'd grown careless, taking larger and larger amounts as his gambling debts mounted. But the most chilling discovery was a note in my file, written in Michael's handwriting and dated just 2 weeks earlier. "Client requests all future communications go through authorized representative due to advancing dementia symptoms." Michael had officially labeled me as incompetent in my own bank's records. That afternoon, James Morrison arrived at my house with Rebecca Chen, a forensic accountant who specialized in elder abuse cases. Rebecca spread Michael's forged documents across my dining room table, alongside the real banking records, comparing signatures under a magnifying glass. "Eleanor, this is one of the most sophisticated elder abuse cases I've ever seen," Rebecca said. "Your son didn't just steal from you. He created an entire alternate financial reality designed to keep you from discovering the theft. He's been paying your bills from the money he stole to maintain the illusion that everything was normal." James pulled out his laptop and showed me a spreadsheet. "We've traced the money. 30% went to gambling debts at 3 different casinos. Another 40% went to cover his mortgage and credit card payments. The remaining 30% is gone, probably to underground poker games or offshore betting sites. I stared at the numbers, each line representing another betrayal. How much can we recover? James's expression was grim. Maybe 200,000 if we move fast. The rest is gone, Eleanor. Your son gambled away most of your inheritance. But I had one advantage that Michael hadn't counted on. During my FBI career, I had made a habit of keeping detailed financial records, and I had kept copies of everything. More importantly, I had never told Michael about my personal safety deposit box, where I kept backup documents for all of our major assets. There's something else, I said, pulling out a folder I'd retrieved from the bank that morning. Michael doesn't know about the life insurance policy Richard took out through his federal employment, the one that pays out only if the beneficiary is still mentally competent. The policy was worth $800,000, and it required an annual cognitive assessment to maintain benefits. Michael had been so focused on stealing my existing assets that he'd never discovered this additional inheritance. James smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since this nightmare began. Eleanor, you magnificent woman. How long do we have? I checked the policy documents. The assessment is scheduled for next month. If I pass it, the money transfers into a trust account that Michael can't access even with a forged power of attorney. Rebecca looked up from her magnifying glass. Mrs. Hartwell, we have enough evidence here to file federal charges. But I have to ask, are you prepared for what this will do to your family? I thought about David, who had trusted his older brother and lost his retirement savings. I thought about Michael's 2 children, my grandchildren, who would grow up knowing their father was a convicted felon. I thought about Richard, who had worked 37 years as a federal employee so we could have a secure retirement. Rebecca, my son, has been systematically stealing from me for 18 months. He's convinced my bank that I have dementia. He's defrauded his own brother out of $155,000. He's gambled away money that was supposed to provide for my care when I'm actually too old to manage for myself. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Richard and I had planted together 15 years ago. File the charges. The trap was set for the following Thursday. I called Michael and, using my most confused elderly mother voice, told him I was worried about some letters I'd received from the bank. Could he come over and help me understand what they meant? Michael arrived within an hour, clearly concerned that his carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel. What he found was his mother sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by open mail, and looking genuinely distressed. Mom, what's wrong? What letters? I handed him several official-looking documents that James and Rebecca had prepared. Fake notices about account irregularities and requests for documentation. To Michael, they would look like the kind of routine bank correspondence that might expose his forgeries. I don't understand any of this, I said, my voice trembling. They're asking about signatures and account authorizations. Did I sign something wrong? Michael's relief was visible as he examined the fake documents. These were problems he thought he could solve with more forgeries and manipulation. Mom, don't worry about this. It's just routine paperwork. I'll handle everything just like always. He pulled out his phone and began making calls, speaking to people he believed were bank representatives, but who were actually FBI agents working with James. For the next 45 minutes, I watched my son dig himself deeper into a federal crime, authorizing transfers and confirming his identity as my power of attorney while being recorded from multiple angles. The real moment of truth came when Michael pulled out his laptop and showed me what he called my complete financial portfolio. The same fabricated interface he'd shown me before, but now updated with new fake numbers designed to reassure me that everything was fine. See, Mom, you have $1.8 million in various accounts. Everything is exactly where it should be. I nodded gratefully, playing the role of the trusting mother while memorizing every detail of his deception. Michael was showing me accounts that contained almost exactly the amount of money he had stolen, as if he'd created this fake portfolio to justify his lifestyle improvements over the past year and a half. As Michael prepared to leave confident that he'd successfully managed another crisis, I asked him one final question. Michael, you know I love you more than anything in this world, don't you? His smile was warm and genuine, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard. Of course, Mom. And you know I'd never let anything happen to you, right? I'll always take care of you. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen and wept. Not for the money. Money could be replaced. I wept for the son I thought I knew, who had looked me in the eye and promised to protect me, while systematically destroying the security Richard and I had spent a lifetime building. The next morning, FBI agents arrested Michael at his law office. The charges included wire fraud, elder abuse, forgery, and interstate transportation of stolen funds. The total amount of the theft, including what he'd stolen from David, exceeded $1.25 million. Patricia was arrested 2 hours later at their home on charges of conspiracy and money laundering. The FBI had traced several of the stolen funds to accounts in her name, and her emails discussing my supposed dementia made her a co-conspirator in the fraud. David called me that evening, his voice shattered. Mom, I just heard. The FBI contacted me about the money I gave Michael. They're saying it was part of a larger fraud scheme. I closed my eyes, feeling every one of my 71 years. David, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what he was doing sooner. I should have protected you. Mom, no. This isn't your fault. But I have to ask, are you really okay? I mean mentally. Because if there's any truth to what Michael was saying about your memory, the question hung between us, like a bridge I either had to cross or burn down forever. David, 3 days after your father's funeral, Michael started forging my signature on financial documents. Over the past 18 months, he's stolen over $1 million from me and convinced our family bank that I have dementia. Does that sound like something a confused old woman would be able to discover and document? The silence stretched long enough for me to hear David's sharp intake of breath. Jesus, Mom, you've been investigating him this whole time. 35 years with the FBI doesn't just disappear because you turned 70, sweetheart. The trial took place 8 months later. Michael had initially planned to plead not guilty, claiming that he had been legitimately managing my finances with my permission and that any irregularities were due to my declining mental state. That defense collapsed the moment the prosecution played recordings of our conversations, where Michael could be heard discussing my supposed dementia while simultaneously making financial decisions he knew I would never approve. The courtroom was packed with reporters. Elder financial abuse had become a national crisis, and my case had drawn attention because of the sophistication of Michael's fraud and my background as a former federal agent. I testified for 6 hours over 2 days, walking the jury through each forged document, each unauthorized transfer, and each lie Michael had told to cover his theft. The hardest part was reading aloud from Patricia's emails, where she had calculated how long they could continue stealing before I died or required nursing home care. Michael's own children, my grandchildren, were in the courtroom. Sarah, his 16-year-old daughter, sat in the front row, crying, as I described how their father had stolen her grandfather's life insurance money to pay gambling debts. Thomas, his 14-year-old son, stared at his father with an expression of bewilderment and shame. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, Michael finally looked at me. For the first time since his arrest, he met my eyes directly. I saw no remorse there, only anger that his scheme had been discovered. The judge sentenced Michael to 7 years in federal prison. Patricia received 4 years. They were ordered to pay restitution of $1.25 million, though the prosecution acknowledged that most of the money was unrecoverable. David attended every day of the trial, sitting beside me and holding my hand when the testimony became particularly painful. During Michael's sentencing, he leaned over and whispered, "Mom, I'm proud of you for fighting this." I squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you for being the son you've always been." 6 months after the trial, I moved into a smaller house, closer to David and his family. I kept enough of my remaining assets to ensure my security for the rest of my life, and I donated $200,000 to a nonprofit organization that helps elderly victims of financial abuse. The investigation had uncovered dozens of other cases where Michael had used his position as an attorney to exploit vulnerable clients. The State Bar Association revoked his license permanently, and several of his victims filed civil suits that would ensure he would never practice law again. Sarah and Thomas came to see me regularly. They were struggling with the shame of their father's crimes and the financial reality of their mother's incarceration. I helped them understand that they were not responsible for their parents' choices, and I made sure they had college funds that neither Michael nor Patricia could access. One evening, as Sarah was helping me organize photos from her grandfather Richard's career, she asked me the question I had been dreading. "Grandma, do you think Dad ever really loved us? Or were we just part of his scheme too?" I looked at this beautiful, intelligent young woman who would carry the burden of her father's betrayal for the rest of her life. "Sarah, your father made terrible choices that hurt people he should have protected. But when you were born, I saw him hold you and cry with happiness. When you took your first steps, he called everyone he knew to tell them about it. The love was real, even if his actions were unforgivable." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I just don't understand how someone can love you and steal from you at the same time." I put my arm around her shoulders. "Neither do I, sweetheart. Neither do I." 2 years later, I received a letter from Michael in prison. He had completed a program for gambling addiction and wanted me to know that he understood the magnitude of what he had done. He wrote that he thought about Richard every day and knew that he had dishonored his father's memory. The letter was 3 pages long, filled with apologies and explanations and promises to make amends when he was released. At the end, he wrote, "Mom, I know you probably hate me, and I understand why, but I want you to know that I never stopped loving you even when I was hurting you." I read the letter twice, then put it in a drawer with all the other documents from this nightmare. I didn't respond. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness, even when they come wrapped in love. But I did visit him once, 6 months before his scheduled release. The federal prison was a 3-hour drive from my house, and I made the trip alone, despite David's objections. Michael looked older, grayer, smaller somehow in his prison uniform. We sat across from each other in the visiting room, separated by a table that might as well have been an ocean. "Mom, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." I studied his face, looking for traces of the little boy who used to climb into my lap to read stories. "Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. When did you decide to steal from me? Was it after Dad died, or were you planning it before?" He was quiet for so long, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "I started gambling again about 2 years before Dad died. When the debts got bad, I thought about asking you and Dad for help, but I was too ashamed. Then, when Dad got sick, I realized that if he died first, you'd inherit everything, and you might not understand the business aspects of managing that much money." I felt something break inside my chest. "So you decided I was incompetent before Richard was even gone?" Michael's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I convinced myself I was protecting the family assets. I told myself I'd pay everything back when I had a big win. I never intended for it to go as far as it did." I stood up to leave. "Michael, your father worked for 37 years so we could have security in our old age. You gambled away his life's work in 18 months. There's no amount of sorry that can fix that." As I walked toward the exit, Michael called after me, "Mom, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I turned back one last time. "I don't know, Michael, but I hope someday you'll be able to forgive yourself." I never saw him again. Today, at 73, I live quietly in my small house near David's family. I volunteer at the senior center, teaching other elderly people how to recognize financial scams and protect themselves from predators. I've helped dozens of families recover stolen assets and prosecute the people who targeted them. The money Michael stole is gone forever, but I have enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. More importantly, I have David, who calls me every day, and my 2 grandchildren, who visit me every weekend. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the son I lost. Not to death, but to something worse, to the kind of moral corruption that turns a child against the parents who raised him. I think about the paths that led him to that moment when he decided that his gambling debts were more important than my security. But mostly, I think about the lesson I learned, that strength isn't about never being betrayed. Strength is about refusing to let betrayal destroy your belief in your own worth. I kept fighting, not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved better. Every elderly person deserves better. And sometimes, when the people who are supposed to protect you become the people you need protection from, you have to be strong enough to protect yourself. If you're watching this and you're dealing with someone who's taking advantage of your trust, remember this: you deserve respect, honesty, and security. Don't let anyone convince you that you're too old, too confused, or too trusting to stand up for yourself. And if you have elderly parents or grandparents, check on them. Really check on them. Ask to see their bank statements. Ask who's helping them with their finances. Ask questions that might feel intrusive, because the alternative might be discovering that someone you trust has been stealing their future. Family should protect family. When that doesn't happen, sometimes you have to protect yourself. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who was taking advantage of your trust? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else recognize the warning signs. And remember to hit that subscribe button for more stories about finding strength when it matters most.